Okay, hello. Welcome to all of you for the second panel. My name is Jeremy Bransten. I'm the Regional Director for Eastern Europe at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Some of you may know about RFERL. Just to give you a little very short history, we've been based in Prague since 1995 when the late President Havel invited us to move our headquarters from Munich, and we currently provide news and information for 23 countries in the greater Eurasia region. This panel is going to be about disinformation, specifically in the Visegrad 4 countries and in the Western Balkans, but in all of the countries that we serve, of course, we're facing very strong disinformation efforts every day. So it's very relevant, I think, for everyone. How can we better counter disinformation amid war and polarizing elections? How can we enhance the efficiency of journalism, adapt the work of media to best tackle these very disruptive influences? That's what we're going to aim to talk about today. So before we get started and I introduce our panel, I would like to thank the International Visegrad Fund for their support and for making today's panel possible. So a big thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests on the panel. So I'm going to start with ladies first. It's Blanka Zöldi from Hungary. She's currently the editor-in-chief of Lakmusz, which is the first dedicated fact-checking website in Hungary. Before launching Lakmusz, she worked as an investigative reporter and an editor with the Direct 36 nonprofit Investigative Journalism Center covering political corruption, misuse of power. She has participated in many cross-border collaborations, including projects of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Immediately to my left, I have Lutfi Dervishi from Albania. He's a political analyst, a lecturer at the University of Tirana, where he teaches investigative journalism and media literacy. And for the past 5 years, he has hosted the Perbale talk show on Albanian public television. From 2008 to 2013, he was the executive director of Transparency International Albania. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Tomáš Kriššák from Slovakia. He's an expert on cognitive security. You'll tell us a little more about what that is. He's been part of many Slovak initiatives that tackle disinformation and hate speech, like the I Am Here network, Confident Slovakia, and many others. His newest initiative, Project Hope, is currently in the pre-launch phase. Its focus is to bring his skills and knowledge to teachers and students from all around Slovakia. So thank you for participating in today's discussion. Welcome to the audience. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll be looking for your questions and an active discussion later on. Couple remarks from me at the outset. Central and Eastern Europe, as we well know, have been subject to particularly Kremlin-driven disinformation campaigns, I would say, for many years now. But we can discern some evolving trends. First, there's been an acceleration, especially I would say in the wake of COVID, a huge increase in the volume of disinfo that is being pumped out. The evolution of AI tools, which was touched on in the last panel, coupled with monetary incentives to spread disinformation online, and more importantly, of course, the very opaque social media algorithms that favor so-called engagement are all contributing factors. Second, we have record low levels of trust in institutions in the region, including media. There's significant variations from country to country, but I think that's the overall picture. It's very relevant for the region we're going to be discussing. And third, we've got prominent national politicians in many countries of Central and Eastern Europe openly echoing disinfo talking points. And often these are pro-Kremlin disinfo talking points. They're amplifying them when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to a whole host of other issues. So that takes me to my first question, which I'm going to address to Blanka. And my question to you is, because you come from a country where the ruling party has been amplifying many of these messages for years, the thing is that the government under Orban has often and continues to present itself as guardians of national sovereignty, as super patriots. But at the same time, they're echoing many of the disinformation points that are coming and are manufactured in Moscow. So how do they manage this seeming contradiction? And what are some of the most effective ways for a fact-checking project in this kind of environment to connect with local audiences?
Thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction and as well for this intro question. Well, we have to say that actually fighting for Hungary's sovereignty is a very hot topic right now in Hungary, because just this week actually there was a proposed bill in front of the parliament, which is called the Bill to Protect Hungary's Sovereignty. And actually when the justice minister talked about it, she said that within our borders we have to fight back those who serve foreign interests. And you can guess whether it's Russian disinformation influence, or our dependency on energy, or should it be like reliance on loans from China? Well, the thing is that actually when the bill actually first came to the Hungarian knowledge, it was introduced by a Fidesz politician who said that the aim of the bill is to cause problems for foreign-financed journalists, fake NGOs, and the dollar politicians, anybody who receives funding, any type of funding from outside of the country. Now, the proposed legislation, according to its text, doesn't actually include journalists or civil society organizations. Within the text, it concentrates on politicians who are running for elections. But at the same time, the text itself is very vague. And it really leaves the door open to target anybody who is critical of the government. Actually, letting a free space for an authority which is to be created to conduct investigations, search laptops, get any type of information that the authority wants in case it suspects that it serves foreign interest and wants to interfere in the elections. And most importantly, this type of actions is completely taken out from the Hungarian normal legislation because there is no authority to appeal to. Who are the possible targets of this legislation? Actually, the answer could be found in an analysis written by a pro-government center at the beginning of this year, which actually named all those publications that, according to this analysis center, threaten the interest of Hungary and Hungarian media sovereignty. And here, actually, newspapers, big online newspapers, the German-owned RTL Club was named, but also Radio Free Europe in Hungary, also our fact-checking website, Lakmusz, and other investigative centers in Hungary. And I have to say that what is the foreign financed label is, for example, funds or cooperation coming from the Visegrad Fund, or in our case, coming from the European Union. So this is the environment that we have to work in. And your second question was actually what are the outlooks and what are the efficient ways of working? And I would like to raise 3 points briefly, because I'm hoping to actually elaborate on this in a discussional way. So the first one is that, well, obviously our fact-checking website is not alone. We were launched in 2022. We are going to celebrate our second birthday soon in January. It is a project co-financed by the European Union, and it is part of a bigger cooperation called the Hungarian Digital Media Observatory. We are working together with researchers of Political Capital and Mérték media organization, and also with media literacy experts from IDEA Foundation and international partners such as AFP. We are also collaborating with a big news organization, 444 HU, a mainstream media outlet. You're going to hear Lakmusz founder Peter Erdélyi talking about how to build sustainable media models in the afternoon session. So actually, we together thought about this idea that, okay, fact-checking in itself is not going to attract a big audience, but if you actually cooperate with a bigger mainstream news outlet, this way you can reach a bigger audience. Second, well, how do we keep in this media environment? Actually, we just keep doing our job. So we are going to do fact-checking, whatever it takes, and we have a lot to do, honestly, just to emphasize, yes, the most important disinformation narratives in Hungary. When we launched our fact-checking website, actually one of our first articles was about LGBTQ issues, because back at that time, 2022 January, the Fidesz government was preparing for election campaign, and one of the biggest topics seemed to be targeting LGBTQ community, and they were coming with statistics, fake statistics, about, for example, how sex-changing operations are getting very well spread in the European Union. We have to stop this craziness of the Western world, and so on and so forth. In brackets, this might be similar from Russian disinformation narratives as well. So, for example, they said that in Scotland, it is possible for 4-year-old children to change their sex without the consent of their parents. And we were like, wow, okay, that's rough. But then in the end, when we looked into the statistics, it turned out that the Scotland legislation is not a legislation, but actually a suggestion for primary school teachers that they should let kids call themselves whatever they want, by whichever pronouns they would like to do it, and it's not compulsory, but it is a suggestion for teachers in Scotland. Okay, so this was 2022 January. 1 month after our launch, the Russian invasion, full-scale invasion, started against Ukraine. So we had a massive influx of Russian disinformation into Hungary. But what happens in Hungary is that this is not spread on the fringe, in Telegram channels or on Facebook groups, but actually it is spread from the highest political levels, and it filtrates through down a very centralized media system in Hungary. So what happens is that on primetime TV show, pro-government analysts go out and say, well, do you really think that the Bucha massacre was really committed by the Russians? Well, I don't believe anything what the mainstream media is saying. And then this is aired on primetime television. So actually, this is the type of Russian propaganda that is very present in the Hungarian mainstream as well. And third, actually, within our fact-checking activities, we are also very much looking at the responsibility of tech platforms on giving the voice and actually echoing this type of disinformation messages, in many cases through political advertisement. This is actually what we are planning to do in a specified project ahead of the European elections and the municipality elections next year. Third, last but not least, besides doing fact-checking, we feel that we need to go beyond fact-checking as well. It might come from my background in investigative journalism, but actually what we see is that our audience needs a bit more than simple fact-checking. So we are actually starting to investigate who are behind the anonymous websites, who are the anonymous actors that are actively spreading misinformation. As in Hungary, it's very difficult to access data, which is obviously very much needed for fact-checking projects. We are focusing on launching freedom of information requests and even suing if it's necessary. One of the main reasons for this, for example, is that this is the only way how we can find out how much public money is spent on spreading disinformation in the public space. And lastly, we are concentrating on media literacy even within our fact checks. So what we do is that we always explain how we did the investigations, because we know that it is impossible to investigate all pieces of disinformation. What is possible is to increase the resilience and the knowledge of the audience to do their own fact-checking. And as well, this ties to actually building on our audience. We cannot reach everybody. The most difficult people to reach are the ones who are the most vulnerable to disinformation. Those who would not actually read Lakmusz fact-checking website or any type of fact-checking website. And what we found is that our audience is mostly interested in actually talking to these people, how they can talk to those who are building their worldview on disinformation. So what we did last year, and this is just a pilot project, honestly, but I'm very excited about this, we had a 3-part course which actually teaches our audience how to do your own investigations, how to judge whether a source is reliable, and then what are the communications techniques that you can use to actually talk about this to people. And we had very positive feedback, so I'm very much looking forward to the continuation.
Thank you so much. Lots of follow-up questions, but we'll circle back. I know that the two of you also have presentations, so let me ask Tomáš next. A related question. We just had the elections in Slovakia, and why is it that a significant segment of Slovak society seems to be so receptive to Russian-sponsored disinformation? Do they even realize that it's actually coming from Russia?
Well, Slovakia is in a special position, I would say, because when we were looking at what is happening in the information space since 2013, we've seen that there was this, well, I would say, continuous growth of misinformation ecosystem that was providing a lot of space for Russian disinformation and propaganda to be present in Slovak information space, translated, and in a way that for many people it looked like a trusted source because it was mimicking mainstream media. That was in 2013, and back in the day we had maybe 3-4 outlets that were doing this. One of them was actually funded by European Union because they had people who were disabled. So actually EU was funding that source back in 2013. So the irony couldn't be bigger. So from 2013, a lot of things have happened and changed, and eventually the information space in Slovakia, if you were looking at the data we did, for instance, on the information operations that happened in the last 3 years in Slovakia, you would see that it's now a very vast system. There's more than 2,000 actors who are working independently, who have like very sophisticated ways how to self-monetize what they are doing. They don't need really Russian money. They are finding ways like how to be very effective. And since 2018, when Jan Kuciak and his fiancée were murdered in Slovakia, and the past government of Mr. Fico lost its power because of the change of opinions in the country, the one thing that was left as a resort to get back to power was to get the votes of people who were already influenced by this vast ecosystem of disinformation and Russian propaganda. So this was like a very pragmatic step done by local politicians in Slovakia, and they helped to normalize Russian propaganda in, I would say, Slovak culture, Slovak information space. And now we are in the position that the new government is actually working on normalizing these media. We already have seen that one new member of the committee of advisors of current Prime Minister was actually in Czech television, and the Czech moderator was really giving him a hard time with critical questions. And this young man was actually talking about disinformation media in Slovakia that were actually the ones that started this whole thing, as they are not disinformation media, they are civic media. So they are even inventing a newspeak to have them legitimized. And what they are doing is they are refusing to communicate with objective media, like television Markiza, Dědík, and other sources that are actually the ones that were critical towards the previous governments for years, but with objective reasons. They were objective in what they were doing, and they were fulfilling the public interest. So people in Slovakia are honestly manipulated in such a big scale that is unprecedented. So in 3 years' time, we have been seeing that in cognitive sense, the whole country has literally changed. Many people, I would say, have fallen aboard or are overboard, and now they are living in this false reality created by disinformation and conspirational theories. It's like whole communities, and the further east you would get in Slovakia, the more people of that new kind of faith you would find. And it really created a new system of how information space in Slovakia works, like where are the threats. And I would say that we have a long way ahead of us before we will be able to fix this, because now the dynamics are that the official power in the state is pretty much depending on how successful they will be at manipulating people. So that will be like one way how to obtain the power for the future. So this ecosystem will be normalized, and I think it will become more of a even a state-funded piece of the media landscape in Slovakia, and it will be taking, I think, years before Slovaks will finally understand that this is not right. Like the state shouldn't be investing in this way. So we will see like what the future will bring, but it seems that Slovakia has changed. It will be changing, and we will have a lot of work ahead of us. In this case, that we want to change back to liberal democracy, to freedom, to plurality, to normalcy, and not having this hybrid form where you basically have moderated and controlled democracy, which has like nothing to do with the concept of true liberal democracy.
Thank you. It's quite terrifying. And related to what we were talking about in the first panel, you're in the EU. Clearly, the mechanisms are not there. I wanted to turn to Lutfi and ask you, because you work with students at the University of Tirana, among other things, whether you are seeing any kind of generational divide between today's 20-somethings and their parents when it comes to how they consume and assess information digitally. Are young people more vulnerable than their parents, or is it the opposite? Are they more savvy and more discriminating than their parents when it comes to information that they get digitally?
Thank you, Jeremy. Short answer, they both are vulnerable. The young people, the main source of the information is the social media, and that's where the disinformations mostly take place. And senior citizens, they get the main source of information is TV, and that's where the propaganda is. So it's like between a rock and hard place. And to make things more complicated, Albania is kind of special case, not in terms of direct Russian influence, because I don't think Russians are stupid. They know that they don't have a chance in terms of the interest in Albania. But the disinformation is more a domestic product. So it's more due to the two main factors. One is overcrowded media. There are, talking about the portals, around 800 news portals, quite a lot for a small country. They don't have, editorial structures. So it's more, they are driven to get more money and to get more clicks, and they don't care a lot what their headlines are saying. And the second thing is that the politicians are becoming media themselves, and the main source of disinformation and propaganda. Two biggest, the leader of opposition and the prime minister, they have the more than 1.6 million followers in the social media. And so what they are doing now is that they do have kind of journalism products, and they transmit in the mainstream media without saying the source of the source of the information. So that's in a nutshell, the problem with Albania. It's not much Russia, Turkey, China, or Gulf states per se, but it's more a domestic product.
I know that you have a presentation also. Would you like to show maybe people what the landscape looks like more concretely and what you've been working on?
So just
Yeah.
the arrows, okay.
I think we are at the end of the presentation, and just I have to say thank you. Okay. Yeah, case of Albania. Talking about disinformation, propaganda, and conspiracy theories. The sources of disinformation are Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, charlatans, extremist groups, and domestic. Yep. Media landscape, 7 daily papers, 3 national commercial television stations, 56 local TV stations, 83 local cable stations, and 2 commercial multiplexes, 800 news portals, 2.27 million internet users in Albania, internet penetration 80%, 1.6 million social media users, or 56% of populations, approximately 3.5 active cellular cell connections, which is 120% of the populations. So Facebook is the biggest actor regarding the social media, and followed by Instagram and Twitter or X. Channels of information is mainly social media, portals, and TV, but it's mainly propaganda. The target are vulnerable groups, senior citizens, minorities. The narratives, as it was mentioned, it's basically anti-Western. Western decline, end of EU, NATO as factor of instability, family values, which are threatened by Western powers. When it comes to Russia, it's more driven by clickbaits rather than an ideological component. When it comes to China, Albania has a history of a relationship with China when the country broke up relations in 60s until mid 70s. China does not meddle in internal politics, but it projects its power through different narratives. So through the CRI, China Radio Internationals. So economic narrative, CRI portray China as a fast-growing, innovative, and resilient economy, often contrasting its favorably to the US, Japan, and EU countries. In terms of the technology and society, China's technological progress and the views of leadership on various social aspects were a recurring theme in the articles. They had an agreement with the public televisions, and it was mostly propaganda. The China advancements in space, artificial intelligence, 5G, and the policy of Xi Jinping. When it comes to NATO and Balkans, the China narrative is, the instability that NATO will bring by expanding, and the coverage of the EU was aimed at sowing discord between the EU and the US. Another country which I did not mention was Turkey. Turkey is seen as the most favorable country according to the polls, and then followed by US and Germany, and that shows that they've been very good in terms of their propaganda through soap operas, but also by calling historical ties and investing in infrastructure and telecommunication. One particular case of Albania is Iran, because the Albanian parliament decided to host all the opposition of the regime in Tehran, And that was a big problem because it followed last year a cyber attack, which almost stole all the personal data of the Albanian citizens and paralyzed most of the institutions. As I mentioned, it's disinformation and propaganda. It's mostly a domestic product, and the politicians are main source of disinformation and propaganda. When they are in a position, it's mostly disinformation, and obviously when they are in power, it's propaganda. Sensationalist headlines are the problem because they are just after the clickbaits. Some conclusions. The problem with the Albanian media is that it is weak in its structure. The public television is also under the influence of government, and there are very few independent voices, or what we call island of integrity, NGO medias. But the problem with them is that it's not a business model, but it's they are due to the Western funding, and once when funding are stopped, their work will be done. That was it, I think.
And the screen goes black. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to touch on that point, because that's of course true in the EU as well. Many of these anti-disinformation projects are getting grants and EU funding. Which is why governments are trying to think of ways to take that away. Is there, related to the discussion that was in the first panel, what are you looking for in terms of help from the EU with these various acts that are being discussed, media bills? Is there anything that you think will help the situation in Hungary and Slovakia? I'll go with Hungary first.
Well, actually, Hungary has faced quite a similar situation back in 2017 already, when NGOs were targeted with a very similar bill, when they were obliged to actually put on all of their publications a stamp that it was done by a foreign-financed NGO. This bill was actually introduced. In effect for a couple of months. Then it was actually attacked on a European Union level in front of court, and it was scrapped in the end. So I'm very curious what the fate of this bill going to be. It is not accepted yet by the Hungarian parliament, but I would say that for a country within the European Union, all those very dangerous possibilities that the bill leaves open is not acceptable. So this is something that actually the international media, the European Union has to pay a close attention to. That's for sure. With different media legislations, actually I see a very, very good initiative from the part of the European Union with the Digital Services Act, with making tech platforms more accountable and actually more transparent. I think, well, as a journalist, I always say that transparency is a key to many, many things. So I'm absolutely in favor of that. At the same time, we do have to see that actors whose main aim is to spread disinformation will use, for example, EU legislations as well in a way that favors their goals. This is what we see with this current act that is being in front of the Hungarian parliament currently. But at the same time, I still have to add, if we are talking about what we are expecting from the European Union, well, I have to say that our sole existence right now as Lakmusz fact-checking website is really in large part thanks to the European Commission's funds. And at the same time, we do feel the problem that was mentioned in Albania, that this is the responsibility for media organizations within each member state as well, not to be reliant on one source of funding, but to look for more projects, also look for crowdfunding opportunities. At least this is the reality in Hungary, because, well, in a healthy media landscape, for example, fact-checking and fact-based journalism should be done by public service media, financed by state money. What we see that the reality is in Hungary is not this. So we have to look for, well, absolutely for other sources.
I couldn't agree more, and maybe I would touch this also in my presentation. So I'll just leave the mic here. Ano.
Já mám pocit, že jsme ji tady neměli. Tak se teď co tady povedal? No, asi teďka ne úplně. OK, a ty na flash, ne? Vůbec. Tak malo vidí tam na.
So it seems that I will be able to present once the presentation is in the computer. So it must have been lost somewhere on the way from Gmail to the hard drive. So okay. I think that in Slovakia we have to be thinking in like two terms, like what is really happening with the society, and that defines like why people see this narrative that foreign funding is something bad, something not legitimate. Because for 30 years, Slovakia is a free country, it's a democracy, but I think that most of the people there are not really thinking about governing our own country in our own way. We might have some kind of fantasy, some kind of misconceptions, but when it comes to reality, like how we would do this, we are still failing to understand this as an adult country. So for many people in Slovakia, for instance, it's okay to pardon corruption of crooked politicians because they think that, oh, so at least things are working. I know they are stealing big tons of money, but at least things are working. The police is working, and etc. So I think it's important to educate, or not educate, but maybe make people in Slovakia understand that if you want a working democracy, you have to invest into democracy in a legal, transparent way, not through corruption, but for instance, through the help that might be coming from our partners, from EU, or even in transatlantic sense from US and maybe other democratic countries. So we have to have this cultural transition first, and then maybe people in Slovakia will accept that yes, it is okay that we are having projects funded by some foreign entities. On the other hand, parallelly to this, there's this ongoing process where the whole country is basically corrupted by foreign money of Russia and China, and this is happening like in bigger and bigger way. Of course, this is something that has negative effects and will be seen negatively. And in the same scenario as in Hungary, I expect that this will be also misused in Slovakia to stop the actors who are trying to do the good things in our country with funding coming from the US or EU. So I personally started working in NGOs in 2017, 2018, and already there was this big discussion by some populist politicians who were trying to create the stage where people would be actually looking through fingers at projects that were funded by EU or US. So I personally, when I started doing my projects, I was still thinking that I have to do the hard way, or I have to do this the hard way, and I have to get the funding from Slovaks in Slovakia. So I started doing a lot of fundraising, a lot of Patreon projects. I was looking for ways how to persuade people who lived locally in Slovakia that it is in their interest to invest into democracy, to fight for freedom, to fight for the truth to prevail in the information space. And fortunately, I can say that I have been successful. And so many other people who have been trying to do some campaigns were also successful. So I hope that Slovakia will remain in good economic conditions, so there will be enough people who would be willing to sacrifice a little bit of their wealth for the interest of democracy and, well, the liberal democracy. So, for instance, I was about to show you like my projects like Confident Slovakia, Checkbot, comic books, educational projects. Most of those things were actually fundraised by local people. Like, of course, there was some funding coming from EU and US, but it was small compared to the amount of money that was actually collected from people living in Slovakia. And I think this is the way forward, because honestly speaking, I don't really think we have to hope for some saving from abroad. We have to be adults. We have to be ready to take the fight against autocrats where we live. Like, what kind of country and society are we if we are still depending on someone else? We are democracy for 30 years. If I were 30 and I was still dependent on someone living abroad and I was unable to find a job and make my own living, I would feel like a fool. And honestly, whenever I go to Brussels and I go to I don't know, like some fancy event, and I see these conditions where I see that money is being poured very, in a very strange way, diplomatically speaking. Like last time I've been awarded, because of this comic book, this award that I'm the European citizen of 2023, and it's a great honor. But I was surprised that the only award was a priceless piece of metal. I mean, if there is a person in each European country every year who's doing something for the European Union and is making sure that these values are then promoted in his communities, why do we give them such symbolic rewards? Why isn't there a systemic approach to actually have like better system of at least supporting local communities to support those people? Like, there are so many ways those systems can be working better. So honestly speaking, I don't really trust the dependency on European Union and foreign donors, because I think that the system isn't really keeping up with what is needed in modern world. So sorry for this criticism, but honestly, seeing and being in this environment for some time and seeing like how things are getting worse and worse and how little reasonable action is taking place, it really it's really challenging not to be cynical about this. So I'm trying to be optimistic, but yet that dependence comes directly to people who are willing to sacrifice something of their wealth, time, even time with their family, so they can improve the conditions in communities where they live.
One more question for all three of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience because I know the clock is ticking. I mean, to what extent is the deck stacked against you? I mean, in terms of the algorithms on social media, because, you know, you can have the most creative disinformation projects or other innovative things. They'll never be seen by the supporters of Fico or Orban because they're plugged into their own bubble on social media where they're getting their own feed, and what you're providing is never going to reach them, or is it? I mean, to what extent is that a major problem?
I see that the presentation is already there. It has arrived. So, but I will also address this question shortly. I think that it's very important in time of crisis to look and speak to those who are already in some way defending democracy. Like, it's very important to keep the morale high in the tribe where, you know, like people are they really mean it. They will not lose that position. But of course, you have 30% of population that will never listen to you. Like, it's international phenomena. Like, those people will always stand against free people, and they will always lean to autocrats. So you have no reason to waste your resources there. And then you have like this middle ground where if you have a good campaign, if you are a good communicator, you can reach out to them. But it's, again, going to be lengthy and etc. So, if I may. And I'll try to make this super short. So, perfect. Okay, so one thing that wasn't really mentioned in my bio is that I'm currently working for Gerulata Technologies, and that is a Slovak tech company. And basically what we do is we provide situational awareness to those democratic actors who are looking at information space, and they want to understand like what is happening there and why are societies aligning or evolving in the way they are. We are based in Bratislava. We are solely working with democratic actors. That is our principle. And we have like few tools that are very necessary to, I think, combat the current information wars and trends that are happening not only in Europe but in the world. So the first tool is called Gerulata Juno, and basically it's a platform where you can monitor whatever is happening in information space in various platforms like Google, like Facebook, YouTube, but even Contacte, Telegram, Instagram, TikTok, and many more. So you have like a comprehensive view of what is happening on in the digital space. We support many countries. It's not only something we use in Slovakia, we are all across Europe, and there are many democratic actors who are already benefiting from this technology because they do understand like what's happening in their country, and they can have like comprehensive communication strategy to avoid further damage to their societies or even the capture of the state, as happened in Slovakia. So here, for instance, you can see when you were saying that my first speech was terrifying, you can see a terrifying image that actually tells you like what is the landscape of information space in Slovakia. And for instance, this is a depiction of one of the biggest psychological operations that happened in modern Slovakia in 2022. And basically it tells you the story when Slovakia was about to pass a legislature on defense cooperation agreement between Slovakia and the US. And all these red actors are actually the ones who are creating propaganda and fear-mongering around this, so they could misuse anti-Western sentiment in the society, and they would be able, using this neurotic emotion in the election time that happened, well, year and a half later. The ones in the blue are the neutral actors. Basically, it's mainstream media, so you can tell like how little effect they have in contemporary information space. And that almost invisible blue space, those are actually the government institutions that were trying to tell society that it is okay and good for Slovakia, that we will have this kind of agreement, we will be a safer country. So in terms of information war, well, it's like 1 to 10. So it's unable, or we are still unable to win this. And if you looked at many other European countries, it's the similar situation. So people who think that this might not happen in our country, it's only something in Eastern Europe, well, think again, because look at some other, even Western democracies these days, and you see that the trend is there. But yes, knowing what is happening in the information space is not the only thing that you can do. You also have to engage with communication campaigns. And for instance, these are some of the most influential videos I did create for my channel Confident Slovakia. And this really shows like how you can, combine modern journalism and, let's say, setting up talking points using video and new technology on various platforms, and yet tackle something so new and different as online toxic nationalism by branding it through positive patriotism and showing something that is, of course, aligned to some agenda, but it helps to inform and place people into some condition when they are more resilient towards these psychological operations that are trying to dissolve democracy. And for instance, there's one more project called Checkbot. Basically, it's a first checkbot that was designed to fact-check automatically whatever false information there was online. People were using it for many years. Basically, you started chatting with this bot, and he gave you like critical questions. So it was you who, in the end, figured out whether you would trust or not trust certain source of information. But also, this is closely connected with information campaigns. For instance, in Slovakia, there was a lot of effort by disinformation media to create distrust or hate towards refugees from Ukraine. So, for instance, what I did, I was trying to give context that actually we are not helping that much the Ukrainian refugees. For instance, it's only 11 euros per person that actually one Ukrainian refugee costs a local population. So it's very small money. And when people realize this context, it also helps to tone down the discussion and make people more aware that helping is good and it's not that expensive. So, and that's my last part of the activity. I don't think that what we are planning to do will only happen in online space. We have to be offline. We have to be in regions. We have to be in schools, institutions. We have to build trust and have new ambassadors of democracy who would be present like all over the country, every country. And with that, I'm producing a lot of printed material, for instance, comic books. This one is comic book Kira. It's about war in Ukraine. And I worked on this last year. And basically, it tells you the history of 9 years of conflict. The first part pretty much represents the comic book. It's very popular with students. They really like it. There was like 6,000 copies. I have only like 4 left, and I brought them here, so you can have some if you want. And in the end, there's a textbook, because in Slovakia, discussing 10 years of Russian aggression in Ukraine is actually a taboo. Like, if you go to school, it's a taboo. So that was actually very brave to get this into schools, and I'm very thankful for all the brave teachers and all the brave families, parents who are actually accepting those things in their homes. So there's like a broader understanding of the whole context of the war, and people are therefore more immune to Russian propaganda. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm mindful that we actually only have about 10 minutes, so let's open it up to the audience if you have questions that you wanna ask. Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Very fascinating. I have questions to all participants or presenters here. Let me start with Lutfi. You mentioned Western decline and also China's arguments about NATO expansion leading to instability. Do you mean that these are like propaganda opinions or what? Because I tell you, Western decline is fact. The GDP, the global GDP of West is declining significantly in the last 30 years, right? With this goes the increase of might of China and other countries. So I think it's the fact, it's not propaganda in itself. So I'm just wondering, and also instability, NATO expansion. Russians argue that the war is a result of NATO expansion. It may be nonsense, but they argue in that way, right? So, and then question to Blanka. There was this east opening to the east of Hungarian foreign policy a couple of years ago, the official policy of Minister of Foreign Affairs, which resulted in the fact that Hungary is open to Russia, China, any other country, all countries around, not only the EU or United States. And I'm wondering, this, what you call Russian propaganda, is the result of propaganda, Russian propaganda, or is it like opinions or in reflection of this opening? Because they claim to be, they are not biased, right? The Hungarian politicians, diplomats, they are not biased. They just discuss and whatever. I don't. To this question, I don't know, because is there any study which would document that there is an impact of Russian propaganda, or is it like opposite, that they discuss because they feel free, basically? Following this opening, which is official policy of Hungarian government, right? And for Slovakia, I have just 2 questions, because it seems to be too gloomy picture. Basically, we have about, if I remember correctly, last time, 17% of population which reads, follows this disinformation, alternative media, right? Is that correct? Plus, many of them, maybe 2/3 of them, read and watch also the mainstream media or other sources, right? So it's not majority of population. And as I said, also majority of this minority follows the mainstream media, basically. So it seems to me a little bit exaggerated, all this impact and all this, what is happening behind. And the second argument is, as you know well, there is significant overlap among those who were anti-vaccination, COVID, which was before the Russian war, and those who think that Russia is right, what it's doing, right? Like, I don't know, 70%, 80%, something like that. So it seems to be more basically something like with cognitive ability of those people, to say it politely, than with Russia propaganda, probably. Thank you.
Okay, let's take it in turn, please. Lutfi.
Well, when I mentioned Western decline, it was not in terms of the economy, but as an alternative to the autocratic regimes. So it was more in context of liberal democracy rather than, you know, GDP and stuff like that. And in terms of EU and NATO are not. So the narrative, the Russian-China narrative is, you know, the source of instability. But countries are pledging, are begging to be in the EU and in NATO. It's not the other way around, that NATO is expanding as Russia is talking.
Thank you for your question about Russian propaganda in Hungary. Well, you mentioned the Eastern opening policy. Actually, Hungary's close relation with Russia on a political level had started before that already. So ever since Fidesz came to power, we have seen economic ties, political ties getting closer and closer with Russia. So when we're talking about like foreign actors, whether we have seen any like troll factory activity coming from Russia or state like Russian-led operations in Hungary, the short answer is that not that much, because actually that work is mainly done by the political actors themselves. And this is how we see actually the spread of Russian propaganda. And when I talk about it, it's mainly like reflecting the very same narratives as the Kremlin is propagating.
I would say that reality beats statistics. So every time I see some numbers saying that it's not such a bad situation, I'm a little bit skeptical, because then I look at the data, for instance, we are dragging from our tool, Juno, and I see that, well, who was the most important communicator in topic of LGBTI in that kind of period of time? And I look at the first 10 communicators, and I see that, oh, it's the people who are actually spreading hate and disinformation regarding the community, and it's not some LGBTI plus community that is trying to impress us with some LGBTI propaganda. So when I see the reality of the media space, and especially digital space in Slovakia, I do understand why we have this shift in society, why so many people are aligning with actors, political actors, who are misusing the existence of this influence for their own goals. And I honestly think that the best data we have are the ones that are representing, they were collected and published by Globsec, and they are showing us, for instance, like how many people in Slovakia are trusting towards conspirational theories, and it's more than half the population. And when you look at the election results, it's pretty much aligned. And then when you look, for instance, you were asking about the COVID and the people who were, well, rejecting vaccination, even though it was for free. Like, I wish people in Vietnam had the same chance, and many other countries. So we did a huge analysis on why this cognitive crisis happened, because I call it cognitive crisis, that people were unable to make informed decision, and they were manipulated to distrust something that was there to save their health and lives, relatives. And when we were looking at the data, we saw that basically in summer of 2020, many of the actors who were then active in spreading Russian propaganda were already inventing their own narratives to damage the trust towards vaccination program in Slovakia 6 months before the vaccination program started. And the state, Slovak Republic, with its communication strategy, I even remember that I had an argument with one of the guys who was working at the Strategic Communication Center. I had an argument that you have to start communicating now. It's already too late. Do it. Do it. And he was like, no, we have time. The vaccines will be distributed in January. We have time. And I was like, no. The bad actors are already manipulating the public. And as Tutetika said, like more than 2,000 years ago, people don't believe what is true. They believe what they hear first. And those guys, the bad guys, were framing the debate beforehand. and they were having an upper hand in communication until the end of the pandemic. And if it wasn't for the other cognitive crisis that I was showing you, they would continue doing so. And they only stopped with that particular information operation because Putin attacked Ukraine, and they looked like fools telling us that the US and their agreement is a problem for us. So if you analyze the information space, if you understand the story, why these actors are doing what they are doing, you understand why your country and the society is moving in that particular way. It's like massive psychological operation that can be understood and then prevented, or at least the damage can be controlled and eventually, through some therapeutic method, yield back to having the conditions that the democracy and social cohesion might be possible again.
Thank you so much for this animated discussion. I'm afraid we've reached the end of our time allotment, unfortunately, but you'll have other opportunities to talk to our panelists, I'm sure, in other settings during the rest of the day. So thanks so much again for participating. Thanks so much for attending, and looking forward to the rest of the program today. Thank you.